welcome to the first video of the word building process. And what you're seeing here is the mind map that I have at the end of the first session. And yeah, we made quite some progress. And I will show you now how we got to this state. Okay, so we take this rough idea that I had, and we're not going to try to expand on this idea alone, because actually I don't think there's enough there to make a good word building project. And instead we're going to start with what you actually need for a word, and that's, I think, at least in my opinion, you need a fee and conflict. Like, those are the two things that make up an interesting word. My overall idea was somehow that these things all represent one separated aspect from like being human. What it means basically is, my idea was that there's one ethnicity, and this somehow turned into these four ethnicities. And the goal now of this world would be to bring back together these groups. So like some form of reunification. Okay, so the basic flow of this world would be something like there's one ethnicity, then some event happens that leads to this group spreading up into four groups. And we have these four groups then. And then the main goal and development of this world is how people in these groups interact with each other, and how some of them try to reunite these groups into one, and how others are opposed to that. Okay, now regarding conflict. Okay, so within these parts, there's obviously some potential for conflict, like something must have happened, why they separated, why you have these four groups and why they develop. There's some sort of conflict potential because they have different interests. And then reunification, there's also like the people that want the reunification and people that don't want it. But I think that's, for a world building purpose, not interesting enough. We actually need some conflict that spans the whole timeline. I'm like, now looking at it, I feel like some kind of like Game of Thrones type of external conflict source. We could say that this one ethnicity at some level of power that would allow them to defend the whole world against some external threat. And this whole separation is basically a mistake. External threat to the world. Okay, wait, so that means basically we have one major conflict source, and we have few minor conflict sources. So these would be our conflict sources. I mean, external threat to the world is still a pretty vague, like, that's still a pretty big question mark. Also a very big question mark here. What happened there? And then also that leads directly into the next question mark. What was that ethnicity? And why was it the only thing that could prevent this major conflict source? Okay, so we could identify like the big question marks we have at the moment. We need to flesh out what is exactly this ethnicity that starts at the beginning of the world. And what is the external threat to the world that only this one ethnicity could prevent? Probably have like also some minor question marks that are not that urgent, but like who are the people that work towards reunification and who are the people that work against it? Would also be interesting, but that's probably for a lot later stage. I mean, in general, there's also all sorts of points we could expand on now, but obviously it makes the most sense to focus on these question marks and start from there. And I mean, just logically speaking, these three question marks happen after this one. So this one is more important, and it's directly related to this one. So this is our external thread. Yeah, it could be something like, let's just brainstorm, right? Could be aliens, could be demons, what else? Natural catastrophe, no? Climate change, maybe? Oh, also a hot one. Diseases, virus, stuff like that. Pretty bad stuff. Anyway, like none of these things imply that only this ethnicity could handle it. Like there's no reason. We look at the 4 ethnicities, they all have their special abilities. Like why would they not be able to handle these threats? So it needs to be something else. Let's start with this one, like possibilities for ethnicity. So they could definitely be something like Olympians, you know, like gods, demigods, you know, like that special group that lives in a certain secluded place of the world up on their mountain and have these special abilities that only makes them fit to protect the world. Maybe like Atlanteans, you know, like some supreme high culture that is so advanced with their technology and skills that they can protect the world. How do we go from here? There needs to be a connection between the threat and this one ethnicity, which explains why only these people can fight this threat. It's to be some relationship between these 2 groups. I mean, you could say that, sure, it kind of looks like these groups work together, they could also tackle all of these threats. Technical ethnicity could build weapons that can fight against monsters. Not really much of a problem here. The only thing you could argue is that if they combine their powers, if these powers get combined in a group of individuals, it's not as powerful as if they are actually combined in one body, like one person. If one person can, it kind of sounds like this whole Avatar thing. You know, mastering the 4 elements. The reasoning would be that even if people of these 4 groups like train and increase their power and work together, they still can't reach the power level that a person will have in this ethnicity, simply because they have access to these powers combined. And that makes them powerful. So theoretically, I like imagining that people from these ethnicities increase their power like infinitely scaled. They could also tackle these threats. I don't know if that's the right way to go, because that would imply that not necessarily pro is good and con is bad for the reunification. Like that's the thing about world building, right? Picking the what kind of things we have here in the beginning, like the threat and the starting point of the world, directly has implications for the end and how these groups have to interact. Because if it's only a matter of power, then con is not really bad. Like con is maybe not optimal because it's a lot harder to fight this threat, but it would be theoretically possible. I mean, we don't have to set anything in stone right now, right? We can just choose a version, go with it, and change it if it doesn't work out, or if some better idea comes along. You shouldn't really overthink those things too much, right? Better to progress than don't do anything. I don't know. Like if we think about it, what is the origin of these groups? For example, like having aliens or having demons already implies like some things about the world, just as much as gods and demigods would imply. Do we need like a world creation? If it's like a myth story. Okay, so I think what we actually need is come up with a world creation story that explains like in a core concept, like how did the world start being, and by that explains why this one ethnicity is there and why there's like this existential threat and how they are related to each other. And then we have our explanation why this group is special. Okay, so I think actually that's the main point that we have to focus on. Okay, so like that's the state we have content-wise, or like idea-wise. There's also a methodological aspect to word building. I mean, as far as I know, there's two different aspects to history and word building. And that is biography of great men. There's historical materialism. So I don't think there's a right or wrong here, because I mean, if you want to make a more entertaining world with interesting people and their emotions and how they live and how they resolve conflicts, and I don't know, there's wars and whatnot, obviously you need like biographies of great men. To be interesting, you need like interesting characters that you can follow and understand what they did. And on the other hand, to have like an actually believable world that is cohesive, it definitely need historical materialism. Because if you want to have in your world like a huge slave rebellion and the leader of that rebellion is like a very important and powerful warrior that frees his people from their oppression, the basis for that is having a system where one country has slavery and maybe is using them as a resource to fuel their agriculture needs. So that means you need to have like the systemic basis in that world to produce a great man. So I think that like you can't really separate these two. We will definitely focus on these two aspects combined to make an actually interesting and cohesive world. At least that's my plan. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, that's what I have in mind. So the tools I definitely want to use, and at least in the beginning, primarily is mind mapping. Then I absolutely want to build a wiki. We will draw maps, not at the beginning. That's more for a much later stage. Short stories, definitely. And also drawings. I mean, we'll see how my drawing skill fares to that goal, but at least would be my ideal way to be able to draw like maybe certain events or characters that are very important. And we also definitely need graphs. I think that's definitely the set of tools I want to use for the whole word building process. Okay, this is it. This is how far I've come in the first session. It's pretty wild. No, not wild. It's actually still kind of easy to grasp. And I think that's a good starting point.